928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Stumbling down the road with Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff as she carries stones, digs holes, and wheels her shovels on her way. This road is the real path. It is never easy and never clear, but always entertaining. This journey has not been a seated event, as Bridgette walks, runs, stumbles, carries, digs, drags, laughs, fights, sings, prays, dances, kicks, screams, and oftentimes falls.
Hey everybody, this is Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff. I am your host of Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show. And this radio show is now live on Wednesdays, of course, because you're listening to it right now, from noon Eastern Standard Time to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And also, the original day is Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can listen to different guests on both days. And so also you can also find us and listen to us on the TuneIn app. And my show is on Studio A, both days. So you can go to our website, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and you can figure out ways that you can actually fund us. All kinds of different ways. We are 100% listener supported. All of us volunteer our time to bring you guests and, important information, news, whatever else that all of us, our different hosts are into. You can fund us by buying heirloom seed packages. Also, if you just want to donate some cash, that'd be great. Also, we do have some advertising, and one of the ways that I support our network is that I advertise my online healthcare business for animals and people on our website. So that's how I support us. So anyway, today I have a return guest, and it would be a return guest from the Saturdays on today, which is Wednesday, Shannon Brown. Hey, Shannon, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I always love talking to you because you're always, you're a pretty informative person with the work that you're doing. And so, in this kind of work, we always have lots of growth. So we haven't talked to you in a while. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of, stuff that you're in and discovering and bringing about. So do you want to tell people how people can reach you, like where your information is? I know that you have a Facebook page and wherever else, so that if people want to go ahead and start looking that up, they can now.
Certainly. So if you want to see kind of the work that I do and follow along looking at the portfolio of what I've done in terms of design work that's digital as well as boots on the ground, make the design happen and come to life as we're there on site, You can see that at facebook.com/eco, ECO, regen, as in regeneration, REGEN, artisans, ARTISANS. So what we do as eco-regen artisans is transform landscapes from water-shedding landscapes into water-catching landscapes. It's all about retaining the water on the land, and when we do that, we receive all of those benefits that water gives us, that miracle of life right there on our site. It follows ancient wisdom from across the globe of when the rain falls, we should catch it and hold on to it rather than pushing it away from us. And too often our landscapes in the world that we have developed are landscapes that push the water away and leave the land dehydrated and brittle. So we're fixing that.
Yeah.
And that's a short form of what I do.
Yeah. So you want to explain to people, it's amazing to me how many people don't really understand how, we have underground water levels, and what, nature kind of does. Can you kind of give them kind of a little bit of a understanding of how we can, refill underground water supplies by the work you're doing and a lot of other people and individually?
Certainly. So beneath our feet, we have a water bank account, essentially, and that's our groundwater supply. And some places it's really deep, and you have to drill down pretty far to find it. Some places it's so shallow that it literally bubbles up through holes in the earth in the form of artisan springs, or artesian springs, excuse me. And so that all has to do with the groundwater table. In some places we have the aquifer. So here in Central Texas, where we're located, in San Marcos, we have this tremendous source of water called the Edwards Aquifer. It's very clean. Most of it's fossil water, which means that it was put in the ground ages and ages and ages ago, which is why it's so clean. And that water had entered the ground through process of infiltration, through percolation. It slithers in between the rocks and sinks down into these underwater chambers. Some people are familiar with rainwater catchment, rainwater harvesting tanks, rain barrels. Essentially we have these big plastic or metal tanks that can catch and hold water for us. And what we have beneath our feet just naturally is big water tanks like that. And that's where well water comes from, is when you tap down into the ground, into that groundwater table, you're pulling water out of that water bank account, out of those underground cisterns. Unfortunately, in Central Texas and in a lot of places that are growing rapidly, we have tapped into that bank account pretty heavily. We have a lot of water expenditures. We've got a lot of people dipping their straws in and pulling water out. But as we develop, we do practices that make it so that less and less water can go into our aquifer. And some places of the world aren't as lucky as we are here in Central Texas, in that their aquifer sits so deep in the ground that water can't reach it again. If that water is down there, and once you've exhausted that source, it's gone, you just have an empty hole in the ground. That bank account can never be deposited into again. But here in Central Texas, with the Edwards Aquifer, we're so lucky that it can be recharged. We have the recharge and contributing zones of the aquifer, and in those areas, water can be put back into the ground. It's kind of a double-edged sword, though, because if we manage the land badly, and the water from the surface goes back underground, and it's polluted, it's got hydrocarbons in it or heavy metals in it, that means that nastiness, that pollution is those contaminants are gonna be in that water. And it might not come out for a while. It might not come out for another 2,000 years, or it might come out in 48 hours. You never know. It has to do with the karst beneath our feet, and it has all these complex maze-like pathways, and sometimes water flows in and flows out. Sometimes water flows in and it doesn't flow back out. And it's a complex hydrogeological thing going on there, and currently it's threatened by a pipeline coming through Central Texas called the Permian Basin Highway Pipeline by Kinder Morgan. We're fighting that pretty hard here because it's such a sensitive geography. If anything happened to that natural gas pipeline, it would leak into our karst geography, and there'd be no telling where those contaminants would end up in our aquifer, in our water bank account. So the thing is that we have to, in order to take care of our water, take care of our land. So historically here in the hill country, some bad ranching practices involved, you've got snakes in that whole cave there in the ground. Just pour gasoline in there to kill the snakes. Well, unfortunately, if you pour gasoline in one of those holes, you also just poured gasoline into the aquifer, which means that you poured gasoline probably into your own well. So there was a lot of bad practices like that historically occurred and have mostly stopped now because we have a better understanding. But, rock is a bad filter. And so, those big holes, all sorts of things can move through them. Our karst is like Swiss cheese, the type of rock that looks kind of like a sponge, but it doesn't act like a sponge. The water just moves through the holes and into the chambers, and it doesn't get cleaned at all. So if we have dirty water going into the aquifer, eventually dirty water will come out of the aquifer. And the big concern is, well, if we're putting water back that's dirty storm water, we're going to end up with a polluted water supply. But we also have this problem of every time we build a new shopping center or a new housing development, the heavy equipment that's used to create those spaces compacts the soil so much that the water can't percolate and infiltrate down into that ground. The ground essentially gets covered up. It gets locked down. Even in areas where it's not paved necessarily, the lawn space will still not have a very good infiltration rate just because the heavy equipment has driven across that soil so many times, and it's collapsed all the empty space between those soil particles that the water would travel between. So once that's collapsed and compacted, the water essentially tries to enter that, and it can't find its way down. And all water can do is follow the path of least resistance. So if you don't have a path for it, it's not going into the ground, it's not recharging the aquifer. So we're essentially in this situation where as more and more people move here, we put more and more demands on our water bank account. We draw more and more water out. But we are also running into this situation where less and less water is going into our water bank account. And if you've ever had, any sort of troubling financial situations, you can kind of see pretty quickly that, oh, wait, if we've got more going out than we do coming in, eventually we're going to have a very, very serious problem. If it's financial banking, well, you're going to go bankrupt. But water bankruptcy is a whole nother level of scary. There's no forgiveness for our water debts. So what we can do about that situation, there's the problem. What's the solution? Well, the solution is to figure out ways to get that water income back, to make places, to make landscapes that do the work of putting that water back into the ground. Lawns are just pretty much lifeless, useless space that water is going to run off of it. For the most part, there's not going to be anything feeding on that, no wildlife eating what your turf grass has to offer because there's no flowers. And what you end up with is a pretty desperate, dehydrated situation for the land. So the opposite of that, what a sustainable development in terms of water would look like, is essentially doing everything possible to catch that water on site, put it down into the ground through the creation of a basin or a bowl. So essentially we dig out an earthen bowl in the ground, and when the water fills that, it sinks into the ground. And when the ground's really thirsty, like it is now in Central Texas, that water is gone from that pool, that temporary pond, that basin, that bowl. It empties out of the bottom of the bowl, sinking into the ground within a few minutes. If our soil was more saturated, if we had a lot of rain, it might take a while longer, sometimes up to 48 hours. If we had really heavy clay that's really, really compacted, it might struggle to sink in and do some ponding, in which case we have to make different plans for how we're going to open up space in that soil. How are we going to decompact that clay soil? What tool can we use to bust holes through that? And working with plants like I do as a landscaper, I use them as my tools. I use them as my employees. The best metaphor is as permanent employees. So when I put a native grass like eastern gamma grass or switchgrass, and these are big bunch grasses. We're not thinking about turf grasses. We're thinking that are flat and like a carpet. We're talking like big bunches that stand up straight and are more like a tall plant as big as a person or more, sometimes 8 feet tall. And what we see on the top is the tip of the iceberg. And below that, there's this intense network of fibrous roots and roots that can punch holes in the soil and open that space up and act as guides for the water. So we use grass roots as guides to move water down deep into the soil, sometimes 15, 20 feet down. And once we get that deep infiltration, that water can make its way into our aquifer and recharge the groundwater. In a situation of a normal lawn, those grasses only have about 6 inches maximum of root depth. And the water from the rain comes flowing across it like a sheet flow. It moves all together. Like if you had a baking sheet and had water on it and you tipped that, it would all flow in the same spread rather than as a concentrated flow. But when the water sheets across that grass and goes out, it goes to the street, it goes into the storm drain, and then the storm drain takes it to whatever the nearest water body is. But in that process, it never gets a chance to be cleaned, it never gets a chance to be filtered. Soil works as a great filter for water. And as the water sinks through the basin of a rain garden, that soil cleans it up and does a lot of that work for us of moving the water, of cleaning the water, and recharging that water bank account. So we can make deposits into this account below our feet, but we just have to be very intentional about our land management. And if water is moving quick across a flat surface, it's not going to have time to sink into the ground because it can only sink in if it sits there for a few minutes. So that's why these basins and bowls are so essential, is that they catch that water in there and they give it a few minutes to sit and sink down. I've been doing some playing around at my house where I put the hose on the ground and I watch that water just flowing across the ground, and it's going everywhere, and it's going off down the hill, and it's running away from me. And that's not very effective for the plants that I'm trying to water. That water is just going away. It's essentially wasted. It's just rolling off down the hill, and it's going somewhere. And as it's doing that, it's picking up all these chunks of soil, all these little bits of leaves and detritus, and it's not very clean anymore. It left the hose nozzle clean, but as it moves downhill, it gets dirty. Even though it's just, dust and dirt, it's, not clean water anymore. But when it sits in the pool, if I've created, a place below that that's a raised berm, and then above that, uphill of the berm, you have this dugout little scoop. That scoop fills up with water, and the water collects against the berm, and it's not running off downhill, and it's very effective for my plants there. And rule of thumb here in Texas is that you can't really put plants in the ground from May through August without losing a significant number of them or expending a huge amount of groundwater to keep them alive. Well, I've been experimenting this summer, and so far my experiment's been going very well, of using this technique of just creating little micro basins. It takes me about 30 minutes to dig one, and it's about, the length of, say, a couch, just dug out a little bit, and it's only dug down about 6 inches deep, but it makes this tremendous difference in the water retention of the landscape. And so far, the plants that I've put in this past month, which is August, the hardest month to grow things in Texas, to install new perennial plants, well, they're actually putting on new leaves and actively growing, even though it's, we've had temperatures in the hundreds and upper 90s for a long time. And that's not great for plants that are photosynthesizing, especially the what's called C3 photosynthesis, but that's a whole nother biology lecture. But essentially, the plants are doing tremendously, shockingly well in a way that professionals in this industry say they shouldn't be doing. And it all has to do with that availability of water to them, which is about the shape of the land. The shape of the land allows for water to sink in more to the ground. And now, granted, I'm talking about native plants too, and the native plant is a plant that's indigenous to this area. It's been growing here since the dawn of time, and it has adapted very specific relationships to the insect life, the bird life, all sorts of fauna here. They have this dance. It's like the clockwork of all the gears of a watch coming together, and it's all perfectly timed together. That's the beauty of ecology, is all of this timing together. But that's because of these long-term relationships, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000-year-old relationships that these plants have with these animals. And these plants, because they're from this place, they've experienced the droughts of Texas, the freezes of Texas, the flooding that we experience. They've extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme winds, extreme. We have a lot of extreme weather here in Texas, but our plants they've been bred to handle it. Nature has created them for this place so that they can do good work here. So they really are adapted to our heat, but establishing them and getting them started in the summertime still is very hard, even with native plants. But the whole thing about making water available makes miracles happen in terms of the plant growth. Did I answer your question thoroughly? I kind of don't.
No, it was super great. No, it was super, super good. You just ran with it. There was like periods where I was going to say something. I'm like, no, she's doing so good. I'm just going to let her run. In Nevada, we have, at least northern Nevada, a large amount of our water is being stolen and piped down to LA, which, makes our situation even worse because, and then they let people overdevelop. They'll let them, and even though we're in a desert and people will be like, well, it's just sand. I get that from the Burning Man community that has thoroughly destroyed the Black Rock Desert environmentally. Because you can't take all these machines with oil and gas spitting out, and have 50,000 people out there and it's green and sustainable and it's getting cleaned up. It's not. They've, since, however long they've had it, they've totally removed any kind of topsoil. They spend like 3 or 4 months digging up every little drop of oil out of the sand and, throwing it into a dumpster. Wow. So in the desert, just because we have sand, you can see like the environments that are super important and how the sand can blow with the wind and it will create these little holes all over, right? It creates these kind of swells and berms. And then when it rains, it can, these little places can hold the water, and then it can, kind of absorb back in. Also the root systems of all these different plants that grow out in the desert. And also something that you talked about before is that, these roots of these older plants, like even giant sagebrush, they have some pretty they have some pretty intense roots, because these things have to puncture through, rock, clay, in order to keep growing. They have to drop large root systems, which you've talked about before, about how the water will use it as a funnel. It goes in near the root, starts to go down the root, takes it down into the deeper layers, helps to guide it. And so we have all these major developments going in. Mind you, we have no water, right? We have all these developments going in, and they let them just tear off, the first, 12 inches of all the soil that has all the plant life in it. So now you have huge areas. They allow them to do it as one big piece instead of doing the piece that they're working on, right? They just let them go ahead and put in roads. I mean, we have some developments that fell apart economically that have road systems and lighting on, and there are no houses at all, because the whole thing was totally mismanaged. And those developments should have never, and the other thing too is, that I look at in the urban settings, because I'm like you, I have all these, things that I'm working on, saving the world and plants and medicine and, all these biodynamics and all this stuff that kind of converges. But, the other thing too that we have to really start thinking about is carbon space. Where you build a, 10-story apartment building, and that you should be forced on the other 4 sides to build a carbon space, where it does have areas for holding water. There is, native plants and grasses that are being developed, and not only to help with flooding, but to knock down the negative carbon, so the positive carbon. The plants, they knock down all of the traffic, they knock down the building materials, as the mycelium and all these other things grow and these carbon areas, get older, then they actually filter, and mycelium will eat the bad stuff, out of whatever is falling. So when it does filter down into the aquifer, then the water's clean. And there's a lot of key components, but here it's amazing what they do to the landscape, and they think, well, it's just sand. And then we have massive flooding, when there's rain. And if we had, better building developments where they were forced to not build these apartment buildings so close to each other and on top of each other, but they were forced to actually have areas of carbon space between them, it would be really nice for the people. They'd have a place to walk. These apartment areas would flood less, right? Because there'd be places where it's holding water. There would be, places for bees and birds and all these other, things that either get killed or are forced, further out onto the edge of, our civilization. So it's this whole water thing, and how we capture water and how we develop positive carbon areas is like probably the most important thing that we could actually be focusing on right now.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm so glad you bring up the carbon point too. And I believe at one point in one of our previous conversations, at the end of it, we kind of started fantasizing about what would an ideal development look like? What would a sustainable world that is developed with human amenities look like? If we're going to have cities, which we are, how would we design that so that it's optimal, not just for human life, but for the natural life that is there too? Because nature is all around us all the time. We exist in nature, whether we're in the middle of a city or out in the, deepest natural wilderness around us. We can find nature in the crack of a sidewalk. That dandelion that's coming up and working so hard. That's nature. A grasshopper, a cricket is nature. The cockroach in your kitchen. That's nature right there. That's. And sometimes we want to push nature away, and we've been at war with it. But it's really time to invite it home, because it's so critical to us, our mental well-being, our physical well-being, our social well-being, in terms of community as well. A lot of people, I see people here around Texas, and they're driving a Tesla, and they're pushing back at the oil and gas industry, and they're saying, we don't want any more of this, and what we want is a sustainable world. So I'm going to drive a Tesla, and I'm not going to be as dependent on the fossil fuel industry in that way. But I think in looking at, well, how do I use less fossil fuels, we also miss, and thinking of that as green is the only way to be sustainable, is the only component of sustainability. I think we miss out on a lot of the other actual bits of sustainability, which it's not just about carbon footprint. It's also about our water footprint. How much water are we displacing? I see Tesla drivers that live in a 10,000 square foot mansion, and that mansion is displacing a huge amount of water every time that it rains. And they're not mitigating that water runoff. It's flash flooding into a creek. And when there's 1,000 homes that are all 10,000 square feet, it becomes an incredible amount of water. Because for every 1,000 gallons or 1,000 square feet of roof space or concrete space, any impervious space, every 1,000 square feet generates 600 gallons of runoff water in 1 inch of rain. So here in Texas, we'll pretty regularly get 2-inch rains. About 95% of our storms are under 2 inches. Well, we designed to catch that amount of water. If we designed to catch 2 inches of water for 1,000 square foot house, which is a pretty small house, that means that we need to catch 1,200 gallons of water. We need to design a way to hold 1,200 gallons. And we can do that by making it, putting a cistern out or a rain barrel out, having a tank that holds the water. And tanks are expensive. They're made of plastic. They're made of metal. Or we can dig out the equal amount of space. We can dig out a 1,200 gallon space and just put that water directly into the ground so that it can recharge our groundwater supply. No tanks necessary. It's much cheaper than using tanks. And the water goes directly to the plants and directly to the groundwater supply where it's needed. But if, what we're doing right now is not mitigating that water. We're building that development, and okay, here's a 10,000 square foot home that's going to generate, 2-inch rain, 1,200 gallons for 1,000 square foot, 10,000 square feet. So we're going to add another zero. That's 12,000 gallons of water from one house. Okay, so we got 12,000 gallons of water from one big mansion. And then we built 1,000 mansions. Well, we're in the millions of gallons of water that's flowing out of this neighborhood. And we'll pipe that through storm drains, but it eventually has to come out into a creek or water body. And if you're around water bodies and you know where to look, and you look for those places where those stormwater outlets are, where all of that piping releases into the creek, what you see there is scars, just tremendous abuse of that land, because there's so much erosive force when you have that much water all congregated. It moves fast and it moves hard, and 8 pounds a gallon, and you've got 1 million gallons coming at you. That's power. That's some serious power. So here in our creeks in Austin area, San Marcos area, we've got highly erodible land. We've got limestone, and people think stone doesn't erode, but limestone does. It dissolves pretty easily. And what we see are the bones of the earth sticking out. We have all these white limestone bedrock. That's the bottom of the creek. There's no soil to hold that water. And so when we hit a drought, the creek runs dry. And historically, when these creeks were lined with lush vegetation and deep soil, that soil was a sponge that could hold water. And then when the creek started to go dry, that water would dribble out of the soil and provide that base flow that would keep the aquatic life forms alive during those periods where there wasn't rain. And so we've so deeply damaged our creeks, but we've damaged them through just the creation of our homes and the creation of our lawns. But it doesn't have to be that way. We could for that 10,000 square foot home, instead of an acre of Bermuda grass, instead of an acre of this invasive species that does nothing, provides no service, it has 6 inches of root depth, nothing can eat it, we could turn that space around and make a space that holds water, at least 12,000 gallons of water. We could catch it right there. And we could plant that with native species that are going to bring the birds home, that are going to bring the butterflies home, that are going to nurture the life that we want to see around us. And life is so much richer when it's surrounded by other life. So, to me, this mansion, in this theoretical mansion that's surrounded by no life, and you're driving a Tesla back and forth to work and patting yourself on the back for being green. It's not a green lifestyle still, because the footprint of the home, the water footprint of the home is damaging, and it could be so much better. So the ideal home, if you're going to have the mansion, catch that water in a basin, use that to plant the things that are going to feed the birds, feed the butterflies. And that abundance is richness. Biodiversity enhances our quality of life.
Yeah. So
we can do it.
Another thing too is if you build catchment, nature inspired catchments on your property, you don't have to irrigate them. Once they're catching water, there'll be, soil saturation. So these plants will continue to grow year round. It'll eventually sustain itself. So you don't have to do anything to it once you just start it off. And you could plant food in it. You could plant, little orchards and different kinds of, plants that actually have seeds and things that will actually help to actually fall and continue to regrow itself as well. And it'll create shady areas, nature's shady areas around the property, which will keep your property cooler in the summer. The other thing too is that a friend of mine was really into electric cars and a lot of this other kind of energy, and so I had no idea that, say, a Tesla car, electric car, it still requires a lot of oil. It's not a sustainable vehicle. Like, each tire is 6 gallons of oil. And the tread that comes off, the particles that come off the tread on by roadways. And I know this because when I do urban farming, I recommend that people have at least 1,800 feet away from a roadway system because of the stuff that comes off the tires is super poisonous. Major heavy metals, it's unrefined oil, it's pretty toxic stuff, and that tread is like a soot that goes onto. And so if you don't have enough mycelium and stuff on your property, you don't have kind of a nature inspired landscape, your soil has no way to eat up this negative carbon. So electric car has all this plastic. Almost every component on it is made from plastic, which is made from oil, unrefined oil that's toxic and does break down. It starts breaking down from the moment that, it's made, off gassing, and it becomes a fuel. So also, we have all these issues about all these fires burning down whole towns. It's because we have all this fuel that's in particles that we don't see from cars and everything else that are breaking down inside our house and outside of our house. And so when these fires come through, it's already ready-made fuel. All this tire particle and everything else just makes the fires like that much worse. So, also as a thought for helping your property against fire, your neighborhoods and other people, creating these kinds of, even if you have the smallest house, I've built things in people's yards, to help offset, like negative carbon, also create food, sustainability as much as possible in their landscapes, where you can create ways that, everything self-waters, for the most part. That's
go ahead.
Yeah, so it's not just large scale. We're talking about like even individual houses. And so this is the other thing too that I think about a lot. I go through some of the older areas that are just really looking bad in some of the, center parts of what was built like during the railroad times and things here. And it looks like Detroit. There are some houses and neighborhoods that are looking Detroity, and I'm thinking, we could tear down some of the worst houses on these little lots and create a little teeny carbon space where it's going to help with the water flow. It's going to, catch some of the water. We can put up some trees and some natural landscaping that people can enjoy, the habitat can enjoy. So even when we tear down some of these older buildings, we could force, through legislation or the people becoming more active, that if you're going to tear that whole building down, that you're forced to actually make it into a carbon space.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm so glad you're bringing up carbon sinks too. And I hope I don't sound like I'm knocking electric cars, because I think that's great technology, and it's important that we do that. It's a step towards this just transition. But we still have a bunch of carbon to pull out of the air, and people are like talking about, well, what technology can we make that's going to pull carbon from the atmosphere and put it in the ground? It's like, well, nature already did all of that research and development for us. It did it over millions of years. The process of photosynthesis, which is what plants do to turn sunlight into food and sugar and plant matter, is a process that takes carbon dioxide and water and sunlight and locks that carbon from the air into a different form, into a solid form that can be in the ground, it can be in the leaves of the plants, it can, we're cycling the carbon back down into the soil. It's really critical that we do that. The technology is right here. Trees do it. That's why the Amazon rainforest is such a great carbon sink, is because of that plant matter, the amount of photosynthesis that's happening is tremendous. So what we need is more photosynthesis all around us. Every time that we pave a space, we're doing the opposite. The more plants we have, the better. Plants everywhere, that's, the best tool we have in terms of sequestering carbon. And the other thing that I was, thinking about, the cars and the contaminants that come off of those, off of our brake pads, off of our tires, that and our roadways and the way we've designed it makes it so that we're left with this catch-22 of we either drive our cars or we have clean water. And I think about it. I drive my car and I think, now, today I'm making a decision. And that decision is that I would rather drive my car than ensure the cleanliness of this water. And I don't want to make that decision.
Yeah.
I really don't want to make that decision, because it's a no-brainer to me. Which one do I value more, my ability to drive places or my clean water? I value the clean water so much more. But I'm also in this position of I have to make a living, and I need to get where I'm going to make a living. And so I have to drive in order to get there quickly. And because I'm driving, and because I know that every time I touch my brakes, a little bit of heavy metal shaving is going onto the street, and it will go into the storm drain, and it will go into the river. It will go into our water supply. It will go into our water body. Oh, what a terrible thing. But it's designed that way. It's one of the unintended consequences of the way we've designed our roads, and we just weren't really intentionally thinking about a way to design our roads so that what came off of them didn't get in our water supply. That wasn't in the mind of the people in the 1950s that were designing our road infrastructure. It's just not there.
Well, and the other
but
thing
now
too
that we've
is
learned,
the sewage. You know how many cities dump? I mean, okay, so we have the Truckee River. It's not a very long river. It comes out of Lake Tahoe, and then it hits all these different little lakes as it comes down out of California and Truckee and then into Reno. But then every town, and then it ends up in Pyramid Lake. And Pyramid Lake, is a Paiute reservation. But, it has so much sewage in it because they back in the days when they were making these cities, most of the sewage wasn't even treated. And so I was reading an article in Canada, like way up above British Columbia, where there's like a town where it still dumps raw sewage right into the ocean.
Oh man.
And so like here, one of the things, that I discover, because I go out and I really look at everything. That's what I do. Right now I'm in a herbal medicine program, and so I have to wildcraft medicine. So I'm constantly up and down the rivers. I'm up and down everywhere, and I have to watch plants develop from when they grow, who they grow with, who they like. Are they more dry plants? Are they wet plants? What are they doing? What kind of, species of, insects like them? What do they do? How do they do it? If they're edible, you know what I mean? All these kinds of things. So I'm constantly looking, but
right.
Just from Lake Tahoe, I'm sure that there's, communities in Lake Tahoe, because there isn't big sewage refineries up there. So there's a certain percentage of sewage that goes in from there. Then you got Truckee, California, that they dump a certain amount of sewage. Then it comes down into like different towns like Verdi. By the time you get to Pyramid Lake, and this is not a very long river, almost and Sparks dumps all of the treated sewage from Reno and Sparks into the Truckee River every day with, fragrant chemicals to, disguise it. You can smell it. And you can watch it foam up into a certain part of the Truckee River, and it dumps out every morning, when no one's paying attention. And then, every other town that goes down, you've got all the sewage that's going into the river. And then you have all the water that they displace from creating road systems and drains that could be, right. Staying on the land, being cleaned up by plants, and mycelium and different things in natural landscaping, and that a lot of these heavy metals and chemicals wouldn't be diverted into the rivers or the ocean or, any of these other places. I was thinking too that they were saying like some of the reefs and areas in Jamaica are dying because they have all of these large scale, different kinds of, hotel resorts that they have people on, and people want their clothes dry cleaned, and there's all this sewage and all this water, and they don't have any way, nobody's forced them to actually create anything to treat or hold this water. So every morning it dumps, or late at night, when they think people are not in the water, it drains right on into the ocean, and it's killing all the stuff that's around the island of Jamaica. So I suspect that this is what's killing a lot of the reefs all over.
Sure. Well, the health of the land is the health of the water. They're so intricately connected. And it is, it's along the lines of sewage. Like we've got all this old engineering that is, has a handle on the chemistry of it and has a handle on some of the biology of it, but we're really just now starting to understand how to use wetland plants to, constructed wetlands are a way to, after the sewage effluent comes out of the plant, to clean it up even more and get it really nice before it goes into our rivers. Because we were on the San Marcos River on Monday doing what we call the Glass Bash, and it's a annual river cleanup that we do with this group called the Eyes of the San Marcos River. And it was a group that was formed to protect the river against tubers, because people tube the river and have a great time, and they take their cans of beer and they throw them in the river. Or
we have that too.
To do the right thing, even if they're trying to do the right thing and put it in a trash bag sometimes, or they'll put it in their cooler and then they go over some rapids and the cooler empties out and beer floats everywhere and it's a mess. We also have a legacy of, there's certain locations in the river where people would go hang out and drink beer generations ago and throw their glass bottles in the river there. And we have these hot spots in the river, and we focus on particular locations where, you dive down, and we have teams of, 6 people in each location diving down to the bottom, grabbing as much glass as we can carry up, putting it on boats, and then diving back down and getting more. And we just do this all day, and every time you pull up one bottle, there's another bottle underneath it and another bottle underneath it. And some of these bottles are very, very old, very, very old, like early 1900s bottles that we're pulling out of the river. And this legacy of poor land management and legacy of contamination and pollution. And along the lines of that legacy, I'm talking with a landowner here in San Marcos, and she's got 5 little kids. And they have this house in the historic district, and all of her kids tested really, really high for lead. So she started looking around the house. She's like, is it in the water? Is it in the pipes? Like, where is this lead? Where is this lead? Well, it turns out the lead's in the soil. And it's in particular locations where an old shed was. This is lead as high as 1,000 parts per million. Naturally here, lead should be around 5. Safe levels, I think, is considered under 100. Even that's kind of pushing it. It's like, she's like, well, what are we going to do about this? I have to protect my family from this. We didn't know when we bought the house that this was here. Like, we have, the development of these children to be concerned about. And how do we clean this up? So again, using the plants as employees, I have a wonderful worker called Maximilian Sunflower. And it's a great perennial sunflower native plant, very, very deep-rooted. It's a native of our tallgrass prairies where the buffalo used to roam. And this plant gets 8 to 10 feet tall when it has enough water and comes back year after year. That's what it means by perennial. A lot of sunflowers are annuals, meaning you have to put out seeds every single year. But the Maximilian sunflower comes back from the root every single time. And I've seen it get as tall as school building roofs before. It's like a solid single-story school building, but it's a 15-foot high roof. And the sunflower is as tall as it is. It's pretty impressive. But what that's doing, it's generating biomass. So what happens in that soil? What we're going to do when we put these sunflowers to work for us, they're going to be there in that place. And as they photosynthesize, they're going to pull carbon dioxide out of the air. They're going to lock it down into their leaves, into their roots. They're going to pull from below them. They're going to pull that lead out of the soil, because that's one of the magical things about sunflowers is they are really, really good at that particular type of contaminant. And different plants work with different contaminants. Some of the native grasses, like big blue stem, are really good at pulling up hydrocarbons. Some of them are really good at pulling up arsenic. Some of them are really good at this, that, or the other. And there's whole technical manuals about this bioremediation and which plants do what. But anyway, back to my friend the Maximilian sunflower. It's standing there in that place, pulling the lead up out of the soil, putting it in itself so that it's locked up and it's not in the soil. It's not where we can get to it anymore. And it doesn't hurt the sunflower. The sunflower can handle it. And then each year, the sunflower goes dormant. It dies back to the roots. The whole top of the plant goes brown and it looks dead. So we chop that brown top off and we bag that up, and that has to go to a landfill because it is just full of lead at this point. But we're removing that much lead from the soil. And we're going to do that year after year after year. And we're going to bring those lead levels back down. It's all through the work of these plants and the magic of what they can do biochemically. And it's pretty impressive work. And it's going to be taking care of that soil, which also takes care of the water, because this house that they live in is also on the recharge zone. And what that means is that water that's on that land goes into the aquifer. So I imagine that for as long as there's been that lead problem in the soil there's been lead leaching from that site into our aquifer, into the drinking water. And it's probably, I'm hoping it's localized, but there's no way to trace that. Yeah. And so we're dealing with this legacy of contamination, but at a certain point, someone has to clean it up.
Yep.
So here we are. This is the I'm a millennial, and we're going to be the cleanup generation. And the Generation Z is also going to be a cleanup generation. We're going to figure it out. We have the tools. We have the knowledge. It's really just a matter of putting the money on it. It's so funny that we can spend all this money, building roads and developments that don't end up materializing, but then when we go to look for money to clean up the historic legacy of contamination, it's hard to find it somehow. And
Well, that's, yeah.
it's so interesting to me, the way we allocate our resources.
Well, and that's the reason why, one of the reasons why I've, lived in my car since 2006 and traveled all over, to study and learn and just do different things, because there is no money in the work that I do. But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to do it. Doesn't mean that, I don't want to participate in, what's important, so that I can help other people learn, to do this. I used Hopi sunflower seeds, Hopi plants last year to clean up a little area that had lead toxicity in it. It was super cool. I loved it. So I love the whole sunflower thing. Okay, we have 5 minutes for commercial and promos, so we're going to mute out, and we'll be back in 5 minutes.
All right. See you then.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who are you? I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
Why am I here?
You are the eventuality of an anomaly which, despite my sincerest efforts, I have been unable to eliminate from what is otherwise a harmony of mathematical precision, which has led you inexorably here.
You haven't answered my question.
The Matrix is older than you know. As you are undoubtedly gathering, the anomaly is systemic, creating fluctuations in even the most simplistic equation.
Choice. The problem is choice.
Right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Be here Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Private Eye Matrix Revealed with Monique Lasan.
Collision Course is back. Schedule will be on Revolution Radio every Saturday night, 6 to 8 p.m. You get outer space. You get honest answers, real researchers, truthful answers, and a place to engage with questions. Take part in the discussion. Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com hosts Collision Course every Saturday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time.
Extendivite really works. Just listen to what some people have to say.
Several years ago, I was developing a very severe situation. I called it my flippy heart. It was doing not good things, and I did not want to go to a medical doctor because I just knew they would give me a cover-up pill. I didn't want to get onto that sort of thing at all. When I learned it was garlic and cayenne is a healer. It is a wonderful herb. I said, I think I'm onto something here. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be without it. It did wonderful things for me.
Extendivite is only $69.95 for a 2-month supply of either capsules or liquid. Call now. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
All right, everybody, we are back. This is Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show. I'm your host, Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff. Yes, today is the second Wednesday that the show has expanded to. So usually I'm on Saturdays on Studio A from 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And last week I also incorporated Wednesdays. So my show's on 2 days a week. And my show is in Studio A, in case you are listening to this and you don't know which studio is which on Revolution Radio. And this particular show on Wednesdays is from noon Eastern Standard Time to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, you can go to our website, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Right now, our old website's up because our other one that we had up was a little hacked. So it may look different to you if you haven't looked at our website in a while. You can go to our funding area and find all kinds of amazing ways to actually fund us. We are 100% listener supported. Everything that everybody does on this network is voluntary, and even hosting the shows. And we try to bring, different things that interest us individually as hosts to the network to help educate and communicate and bring my show in particular. I like people that are doing grassroots work that have kind of gone beyond talking about it and actually are applying it and doing it, learning as they go. Those are my favorite kind of people. So also you can, just drew a blank all of a sudden. But anyway, all right, so back to, so you're listening to Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show. And my guest today is return guest, Shannon Brown. And, the topics, we're in the second hour now. So the topics that we're discussing, everyone could do. We're not discussing topics that, you're going to need to be a rocket scientist, or you're going to need to be well educated. There's all kinds of information, videos on YouTube that talk about swells, which are, kind of these landscaping techniques that, Shannon's been talking about, ponds or sections where you change the straightness of the earth and you create like a little pond area to, capture water and then build supporting plants around it to actually filter and clean the water. So everyone could do this in their yard. Everyone could, take responsibility. People who have excess land, or say you have a building or a house that could be torn down, you could actually turn it into a positive carbon area, to help in large city conditions, to break down the negative carbon and raise the positive carbon areas, plus give, all of the insects just a beautiful place to habitate and, grow and expand. And, we can do all that stuff. We can all do it individually. I know people who are doing roof-size beehives, little mini beehives on their patios, 20 stories up. I know people who are, growing mushrooms. I always tell people just grow something. Even get some sprouts and start sprouting your own food and eating that and see what it does. Just try, see what the relationship is between, water and plants and how much water is needed. And, maybe even do a study on where your water comes from. go out and do the trails around some of your waterways around the city area. Start asking questions about your sewage. Where is our sewage going, and how is it treated, and is it treated? And just a lot of these different kinds of aspects. Just start looking around, and you might be surprised at what you find, and it may be a motivating factor for you to get involved in at least managing whatever scape you can manage, which may also help you to expand into larger areas so that we can get clean water and we can have our aquifers, fill up with water, and we have the appropriate plants that actually can help us to utilize some of these systems, and so that we can change what's happened. But this isn't about, us spending a lot of time. I've done this lobbying in the past where you spend a lot of time pushing paperwork and research and trying to get these people in our legislative systems to who have an iron in the fire, who usually with some kind of money, who aren't interested in a lot of this kind of work sometimes. So it's up to us individually to start doing the work and start gaining the understanding and figuring it out and working together. So it takes real people like us to make change. So Shannon, are you there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, great. So do you want to give people your information on where to find you again so that they have it?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Shannon Brown, and I'm the founder of Ecosystem Regeneration Artisans. We're a landscaping company in Central Texas, and what we specialize in is building rain gardens, bioswales, bioretention features, low-impact development, green infrastructure. These are all search terms that you can use to learn about these techniques as well. In permaculture, we call them swales. Low-impact development, we call them rain gardens. But we're all speaking about the same thing, which is holding water on the land. And you can find images of and videos of what I've done with my team in terms of boots on the ground, making rain gardens happen to catch water on our land here in Central Texas at our Facebook page at Eco Regen, R-E-G-E-N, Artisans, A-R-T-I-S-A-N-S. And that's a Facebook page. And you can also see our design work there. I've recently come into being able to map out exactly with 1-foot contour lines what the shape of the land looks like so that we can plan out where these basins are going to go. And it gets pretty fancy. And I've started working with some city and government agencies here in Texas, which I'm very surprised with, because living in Texas, I've always expected that if we're going to make a change, well, we are the change. There's no one but me to do it, which is why I founded this company, was to be that change here in Central Texas, to bring this green infrastructure, this low-impact development technology to residential homeowners here. And I've been very blessed in this first year and a half of my business, and that city government has started to take notice. The city of Austin is doing what's called their Raincatcher pilot program, and they're working with a nonprofit to install rainwater catchment systems on homes in the Waller Creek watershed of Austin, which has been very, very developed and very, very damaged. And they're trying to make efforts to fix it by catching 100% of the runoff from 75% of homes in this 1,200 home neighborhood. So, like referring back to some calculations I mentioned earlier, just rough numbers. Every 1,000 square feet of roof or pavement generates 600 gallons of runoff in a 1-inch rain. Well, here we've got 1,200 homes, and we're going to try and catch. I'm not good enough at math to do what 75% is, but let's say we do 1,000 of those homes. And each of those homes is 2,000 square feet. So we're at 20,000 square feet of roof space that we're mitigating. 20,000 square feet of roof times 600, that's, I think that's 1,200,000 gallons of water that we're going to try and catch. And we're going to keep that out of Waller Creek. And this is a city-funded program, and it's been remarkable so far to see it working, to be catching 100% of the runoff from these homes. And the homeowners a lot of them are like, we don't use our lawn and outdoor space that much. Yeah, give it to the creek. Give this space back to nature. Use my space to protect this creek that's behind my house and make it more beautiful and protect my downstream neighbors, because I don't want to see downtown Austin flood. So if my yard space can do something to prevent that, yes, let's do that. And this project has been years and years in the making, and we're just finally starting to implement it. And it's a tremendous thing to see that transformation, and really what happens in these spaces, and to the people that are recipients of this too. The people that don't go outside all that much and haven't really appreciated nature in quite a while. When things start blooming in their front yard and it's a changing environment daily, and there's all sorts of frogs coming all of a sudden, and oh wow, there's hummingbirds. I stepped out my front door to go get the mail, and a hummingbird flew past, and then I saw this butterfly, and then a frog hopped in front of me, and wow, when these fill up with water, it's so cool. I go outside now while it's raining to stand on my porch and just look at if this garden is filling up and how far it's filling up and how fast it's filling up, because these are such dynamic spaces that it might fill for 2 hours and then be empty again. But in that 2-hour time, you get to see all of this clear, beautiful water sitting there, and there's something that just feels so right about watching that sink into the soil, and it's tremendous. So I've been blessed to work on that project, and then down in San Antonio, they're doing an urban farm, and we're going to catch the rainwater there in long swales, and we'll plant fruit trees on those, and in between there will be 30 feet of row crop space. Divided into plots, 40 feet long, 30 feet wide, and members of the community are going to be able to access that space. It's through the San Antonio Housing Authority. It's in the east side San Antonio food desert, and here we are taking action. The ground has been broken. We had a wonderful groundbreaking ceremony, and it's time. We're putting in these systems to catch the water and to feed people and give people access to land that wouldn't have access to it otherwise, and access to healthy food that they can grow themselves and have a relationship with it, and also classes to teach it. EcoCentro in San Antonio is a big entity that is teaching people to garden and how to live healthily, and eat healthy food, cook healthy food, and have it be from right here where they have a relationship with the plant that grew it and the soil that grew it, and it forms a community space. So I feel tremendously lucky to be working on that, and working with a waterfront landowner on the Blanco River who's ready to catch the rain on her land, because in that area of Texas in Wimberley, they've recently had a lot of groundwater pumping permits that are pull out of the Trinity Aquifer, which is right there next to the Edwards Aquifer. They'll be pulling huge amounts of water out of the Trinity, and the people rallied so hard and they fought so hard to try and stop this from happening, and the permits went through anyway. And so now people are in this place of, okay, well, what can I do then? If, we've had this horrible experience of feeling so disempowered because we rallied and fought and tried to keep this groundwater pumping from happening. We couldn't stop the groundwater pumping. Well, what can we do? Well, we can use the land that we own, and we can do something to shape that. We'll do one active thing to shape it. And then for the rest of their life, and then for future generations to come, that land is going to be putting water back in the ground, because that bowl shape, that rain garden, that swale is going to catch that water, and it's going to sink it right down into that Trinity Aquifer, right down into the Edwards Aquifer, and they'll be giving back. So I'm blessed to know people that are ready to invest in changing the land and changing the business as usual paradigm, and actually do some work to give back to the water. And it's been tremendous to watch how this unfolds. And
Yeah, no, it's
doing it for many years.
fantastic. It's so fantastic. Like where I'm at in Nevada, it's still business as usual. So it's, sometimes I'm a one-man band, but I'm willing to do it until, things change. Yeah, I was thinking about something that last year, this woman called me to help her with she had some energy problems in her properties and houses. And so she's traditional, feng shui from China, like old family, and she couldn't, change the energies and stuff. But I did learn when I was helping her with some of the work to help fix some of the energy. She was teaching me some things that were kind of interesting, like one, space creates opportunity, right? Which, creates change. And so when you were talking about, this development, and these people are utilizing their land, to capture this water. And I just saw the water, being captured and then feeding what needs to be fed and then going down into the ground, and then that water going back into the cycle, and then the rain coming down again. And I was thinking, that space creates flow, right? It's creating like this perfect flow of energy. And so of course it would start waking people up. Of course people would start noticing it, because the way that they had been living, for a long period of time in an enclosed environment, right? And sometimes I think like a lot of people who acquire a lot of things and then they put it into their fenced environment, get stuck in the hoard, you know what I mean? Get stuck in that kind of energy, which it doesn't go back in and through and back around and back in and through, back around. So I was thinking about like how interesting that is, that these people are really excited in that development and they're noticing all these things because there's this flow of energy, which is nature. I mean, that's a very nature thing, has returned, and it's almost like it's vibrationally also awakening them, kind of activating them in a way.
Yeah, I feel that. And I can understand the activation because, I feel I feel the call, and we are each nature, and some of us are becoming nature protecting itself. So that scene in Avatar where all the forest creatures come and join the fight, it's like that. And we can all be part of that. And some places, like where you are, I imagine that's pretty tough ground to be breaking. You're probably one of what I would think of as an early succession or a pioneer plant out there holding it your own and trying to, stabilize some of that sand so that other things can grow around you. And that paves the way. And once that starts to happen, once we start to group up together, it's tremendous, the power that we can harness.
Yeah, no, I try to, whatever opportunity, like there were some people that approached me from the BLM to go way out north to look at some land that has had, several fires and all kinds of problems. And they didn't want to pay me. They weren't even willing to give me gas money or anything. But they would give me a camp, to stay in, and that I could maybe look at it and then give them some ideas about, my approach and what I think, kind of a thing. And I was totally willing to do it, but it hasn't really gotten off the ground, which is fine. So now I'm like working on, finishing up my certifications for herbal medicine, and I'm doing wild crafting this summer. So all my medicines, I'm focused in on pain, autoimmune system disease, and also inflammation, right? Those are the medicines that my focus. And so I'm making these medicines by going out and picking them in nature, right? So I have to be aware of the ecology. For example, sometimes for just to get enough jar of tincture, I have to go to like 6 or 7 locations because there isn't like enough of one plant growing in one location. So there's this, ecology that I have to pay attention to. I'm also decided this fall I'm going to be collecting a lot of seeds from a lot of these plants so that I can go out and broadcast them into other areas because, they're needed. But also they're like my children now, you know what I mean? Because I'm watching them in nature grow their little leaves from the ground. And then in some cases like teasel, which I'm going to be harvesting teasel root because it's unbelievable with curing Lyme disease. And so, and I think about, my teacher, Bobido, my last native teacher who passed away, and he said, when we cure the disease in ourselves, that will cure it from the land. It'll cure it from the earth someplace. Doesn't matter where it's at, but it will release it. And so I think about, this teasel plant, that's this amazing plant. It's so incredibly, just unbelievable watching it develop and grow. And it's a plant that I'd never noticed before. It's like on my radar. And I'm thinking about getting that where the Lyme disease is, right? How do we get that into the habitat where the Lyme disease exists? And then how does that have a relationship with the soil that can actually help to release it? You know what I mean? From the insects and, who knows, right? I mean, it's all theoretical and it's all a process, kind of development. But being able to go out and look at these different plants and what they do, what kind of nutrient that they provide people, medicines that they provide people, making them from the exact environment where people live, and trying to get it into people's bodies. I mean, a lot of time I give a lot of my test, my test and development, I have a lot of clientele who, are my testers. And it's interesting what happens when they start taking a medicine that's grown from their environment, that hasn't been anywhere, and it's fresh and it still has all that information and data that's in it. And that information and data goes into their bodies. And so now I'm trying another approach with the people around me is to try to get them enough of this plant medicine in their bodies that, if they need it, get it in their bodies, and then watch how all this information, these little hard drives of information are being plugged into their bodies, and watching how things start to happen in their bodies and they start to heal. And that is a direct relation to the plants on the land. And so I'm asking the plants to go out and I talk to the plants to help me heal the people so that we can get more people involved with paying attention to what's going on. And I have a really good friend of mine who's going to go out and help me harvest teasel root this next weekend. And she'll get to see what kind of a journey it really is of all the different locations I have to go to. And I think, this is also part of the problem is that a lot of these plants are so, sporadic and sparse that, if it's hard on us to find it to make enough medicine for our bodies to heal, think about how tough it is for the environment, right? To pull down enough medicine or nutrient or combinations of whatever is needed, So it's kind of interesting how all my work with biodynamic farming and then all of my wanting to regenerate, land and creating, all these medicines for the land to help generate microbial mass. And then now, and all my work nutritionally, and then now it's like coming full circle with the herbal medicines and how it all works with the land, the people, the animals, it's all significant and important, but there's a lot of things that have to come in to play. So I think about a lot of this, and I think I'm kind of anti, at this point, sorry, supplement industries and herbal medicine, but I also more and more and more, from the biodynamics, learn that, monoculture of any kind is destructive, and it's not really healthy for the person, because these plants, even in a medicinal setting, have to be grown in your area to help with whatever issues you have. And they also have to be grown together. Like when I go out to harvest certain medicines, I know that certain plants have certain relationships to each other. They grow in certain ways to each other, and you can almost like say, okay, if I go out And, you know, I find mullein, you know, like there's a whole bunch of plants that like to grow around mullein, you know, because it's friendly and it has a relationship to a lot of different plants. But I know that I'll find yarrow for sure. You know, there are these, it's interesting how you start to see how their relationships are, and that their relationships to the medicine and the nutrient that they build in themselves is really important to how they're growing together kind of in a natural setting, and how imperative it is that we grow them in, you know, these new, you know, modern kind of ways that we're developing to help the soil, to help the water, and to help all of these, because, you know, it's exactly us. Our bodies are acting out the same exact way as this land, whether it's sterile, whether it's dry, whether it's been beat up, whether it's impacted, you know, all of these terms we can use for the disease that's going on in our body. It's
absolutely. Dehydration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I can always tell people, like, we are never going to have health. I don't care what doctor formulates whatever kind of thing. It's not based in nature. Every time you move away from an actual living plant as a medicine or a food source, you are moving away from, you know, long-term health, and not only long-term health, but also your ability to create your own long-term health by growing your own food and growing medicinal plants in your yard, and creating areas where the groundwater can go back in, right? Sustainable areas that, you know, you don't have to touch a lot. You know, people always say, well, you know, I can't pay for all that water, for all that other stuff. It's like, no, you just develop little areas that it sustains itself. You know, it may take a couple years, but eventually it will sustain itself and you won't have to pay attention to it. And when you need new medicine, you can go out and plant it. You know, when you want to have different kinds of, you know, food varieties, you just go out and plant it. And then you're in charge of your health. You're in charge of your environment. You're in charge of all these different things. And it gives you a sense of well-being to know that you don't have to go to somebody else to get that information or that medicine or whatever else, and you don't have to go pay for it. So then you can drop a lot of the type of work that you don't like, that you're making money for, to buy all these supplements, because now you grow all these things naturally in your own yard and you don't have that cost. And it's even better because it's biological, right? It's biological, means that it goes right in and it's utilized 100%. Anyway,
absolutely.
I just kind of go off on the old health thing because I've been in the health industry a long time and it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy how they don't relate
using their bodies.
Yeah.
You know, just a little physical activity too goes a long way. Speaking of like small things that you can do in your own yard, you know, I would say challenge yourself, if you're listening to this, to go out and buy a flat of 20 plants. It'll probably cost 4-inch plants, little itty bitty guys. Buy some of those. Make sure they're native. You can visit the local NRCS office or NRCS website for your area. They'll have lists of native plants, and the NRCS stands for Natural Resource Conservation Service. You can find that they have all these tremendous resources listing what plants grow in your area, and you can make a really easy pollinator garden, and you can really easily invite nature back into your home space. So, go get those plants. Either buy them at a local nursery, and make sure you find native ones. That's really, really key. If you want to support pollinators and you want to support native wildlife, you need the native plants that are their partners that they've had long, long relationships with. You find those native plants, you take them home, and just spend about 30 minutes, pick a spot, observe how the sun moves across it. Are you a sunny spot or a shady spot, and pick your plants based on that. And then dig out just one shovel width. Dig down one shovel width wide on a contour. So what a contour is on the topography maps, there's those squiggly lines. we've seen these maps of like BLM land or just maps showing the lay of the land. If you see one of those squiggly lines, that line represents an area that's all at the exact same elevation. So you want both ends of your garden at the same elevation. And what you do is dig between that point once you've found where it's all the same elevation so that, water sits there on the surface once you've dug that hole. This is a lot easier with diagrams. It's hard to describe without a diagram, but I'm going to work on it. So what you do is, on that contour, you dig out a little basin, shovel wide, shovel deep, just 6 inches or so. And the soil that you dig out, that spoil soil, just flip that over and lay it on the downhill side and create a little berm there. And this is like making a kind of like a moat in a sand castle, right? So you dig that little moat and you make that little wall on that downhill side of it, and then fill it with water real quick. Watch what happens. Look at the water sit there. Watch it sink into the ground. And then place your plants in there. Put them in the ground. Water it again. Make sure that second watering, that is right after the plants go in the ground, is that most important watering of that plant's life. It's really critical that we water our plants in right after we plant them, because that gets the oxygen and the airspace out of the soil so that the roots don't dry out in the transplant process. So once you've dug that space out, put the plants in there, then you just watch it grow and keep it watered. Maybe, depending on your environment, if it's hot and dry, you might water it once a day for the first month, preferably early in the morning, but evening is good too. And just keep it watered. Sometimes you're going to water 2 times a week, sometimes, less, sometimes once a week. Sometimes you won't water it at all because it'll just catch the rain. But you can do this simple little garden, and it'll probably take only 30 minutes or so of digging. It's really simple, depending on the size that you want to do. And it's incredible to watch the transformation, to watch that space turn green. Once you've caught the water, everything begins to transform, and you can create these little oases. And if you want more detail with diagrams showing how to build a rain garden, you can just search how to build a rain garden. There's a really useful website by the Rain Garden Alliance, and you should be able to just search Rain Garden Alliance, and it'll pull it up for you. And they have all sorts of instructions about exactly how to build your own rain garden and start catching the water on your land and giving it back to the groundwater supply beneath us. We can give back to our water bank account. We're setting our children up for success. We're setting ourselves up for clean, clear water for future generations. And it's a beautiful thing to participate in. And you get a little exercise.
You get a lot of exercise, which is a bonus.
Yeah. You can do small projects or big projects. I'm serious about, you can do this in 30 minutes. Once you've got the plant material set aside, just 30 minutes of digging will make a difference.
Yeah. So the other thing too that's kind of destroyed, sometimes, some of we really need animals, to actually help with some of the areas that have been, really kind of abused and destroyed, to help get them out there. A lot of the people, the Savory, Alan Savory and Holistic Management, for really big areas that, have been really kind of destroyed. You can use animals, but animals also, like in the U.S., that I've noticed, and I've gone to like all kinds of different farms when I was heavily involved with the Northern California Biodynamic Association and Rudolph Steiner College. We would go to a lot of the different farms that, pretty much the public was really not allowed to go onto, and these biodynamic farms produced just amazing things, and the off-gassing of the positive carbon from their areas was just unbelievable. Out. So your stuff will permeate out onto your neighbor. It'll permeate out. I like another thing that I was thinking about the other day is kind of like stem it. Paul Stamets, I think is his name, the mushroom guy.
Mhm.
But he said that they can see from satellites right now that they can see the mycelium, or the mushroom spores periodically, that they're leaving the Earth environment. And that eventually, science thinks that, these will go out into the universe, and hopefully they'll land on, billions of years from now, they're going to land on, other planets and help to start re-terraforming. And so I think a lot about that, like on a small scale, like what we do with our yards, and how that, deploys out into other environments around us, and it helps to actually heal other environments, as we heal like the environment in our yard. There was one of the farms that we went on, there was a guy who was showing us on this one farm how badly their river was destroyed because there was huge amounts of cattle ranching, where there was too many cattle. In biodynamics, we look at one cow for 1 acre, because that's about what can handle all the urine, you know what I mean, and the defecating, to go into the soil. The soil can handle. But they were allowed into the river systems, so that the cows could drink, and it literally destroyed huge amounts of the riverbeds and things like that. And so this guy, what he had done is he actually restored his whole side right there of the riverbank. He had to kind of do it secretly and stealthily, because the state wouldn't allow him to do it, to restore it. And he ended up restoring it with trees and continuing to build onto it, and plants and everything else, with his, backhoe. It seems like backhoes are really important to a lot of this work. But he eventually fixed 20, he rebuilt 25 acres of landmass and topsoil in 10 years that had actually gone down through the river, because that area was really heavy, large cattle ranches at one point. So the cattle, kind of ate all the environment, the plants, and then because of then they started to break down going up and down the hillsides into the river to get water and navigating around. And so it was kind of interesting to see how much, from standing on his land, where he showed where the river, the land had been destroyed too, and then walking that land after he did this, massive reconstruction, and how much land was restored. It was shocking, actually. Sometimes you don't really understand until you actually see it firsthand. Like, you're talking about 1,200 gallons of water per house. What is that? How big is that? Like I was trying to look online. I'm like, what does that equate to? I couldn't find anything what 1,200 gallons would look like, but it looked like an average swimming pool.
Yeah. I mean, that essentially, yes. 600 gallons would be, like a couch size. Like I know there's lots of sizes of couches, but if you think about a couch that's about 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, 4 feet deep, that would be about 600 gallons. I found a picture online of a woman inside a 600-gallon fish tank, and she's about my size, it looks like, and she fits in there quite comfortably, all stretched out, arms extended. That would be a 600-gallon size, and so double that, and that's 1,200 gallons. It's a substantial amount of water.
Per storm, per rainstorm.
That's per 1,000 square feet of roof space.
From one rainstorm.
And then that's 1 inch. Well, 1 inch of rain, because rainstorms have different sizes. Yeah. You can have 50 inches of rain dropped on a city all at once, like Houston and Harvey. There's no way we can design for that. But if you have 2 inches of rain, well, we can calculate how much space we need to accommodate that much water for a certain size of roof space. That's fairly within our grasp. But we can't design for the hugest outlier storms, but we can design for the average storms. And what we try and shoot for is the middle of a bell curve, the average storms, not not necessarily like right in the middle average, but at least 95% of the storms, we want to catch those. So that
Right. So,
when
and
the
I
big
think,
storms do come, we have a little bit of a
yeah. So, okay. So in Nevada, I mean, the last couple of years we've had some rain, but usually we don't really have any rain. At least where I'm at, we usually have snow. So I think 1 inch of snow is equivalent to 1 foot of snow. Is that the average?
Oh, I have no idea. We don't have snow in Texas. I have no idea what that conversion would be. That is well outside my range.
Well, I was just thinking about that, converting it to what that looks like here. You know what I mean? So you have snow on the land, and then, if it all pooled down off in your land to the center point into this little pond, and then your little pond could bring it down into the ground, right? I was just thinking about that for the winter, because there are a lot of areas where I go out in this area in Nevada, where they're closer to the river, but you'll see where there's natural areas that are dug really far down, and that it grows, amazing habitats on its own. Like you'll have a couple support trees, like, old cottonwoods. You'll have a couple of those, and you'll have some cattails. You have all these natural plants, mullein, and all kinds of different things that'll grow in there. But then when, like it snows and the snow starts to melt, it all like starts to run off from this area, and it pools. It keeps, as it melts down, it keeps pooling into these pools, and then it digests it. And then there's water. This one that I've been watching off the river, it's a place where I go collect some plant medicine. It still is moist. Like if you walk down in there, mind you, it's about at the center point, it's probably about 5 foot deep. But I can go in there and move around through the grasses and stuff like that, and I can poke the dirt, and the dirt is still moist. It's not muddy, but it's still moist. So it's almost going to be, we're coming into fall. So all those plants are still going to have moisture even up until, our snow season starts again, without anyone helping it. I mean, maybe initially helping to build it, but it can take care of itself. And this is all just from the snowpack, that it's still continuing, to have in its soil.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, and especially along the lines with the cattle too, because that's a perfect example of what in the industry we would call the riparian sponge. Riparian is a fancy word that means along a river or creek. So anything creekside or riverside would be riparian, and the idea there is that the soil holds the water, and the plants also help hold the soil together and help move that water into the soil deeper and hold those banks together. Along the Blanco River here, we had a horrible flood, Memorial Day 2015 and then October 2015, 2 horrible floods that removed really large 500 to 1,000-year-old cypress trees. It's a tremendous tragedy, but a lot of that was due to the riparian sponge being damaged. And if you think about the roots as kind of a basket, all the roots of the plants act as a basket to kind of hold that sponge in place. And that sponge of the soil will hold the water and sustain the base flow to the creeks and the rivers. And that's really, really important to healthy waterways and to keeping them clean, clear, and flowing rather than flooding. But if we take animals down into that riparian sponge and they eat all of the grasses and they eat all of the young trees, well, then you've lost the basket that holds your sponge, and pretty quickly after that you start to lose the sponge. And after you've lost your sponge, well, you end up with a situation where you're down to bedrock, and the erosion can go no lower than that. And what will happen is that there's nothing to sustain the flow of that creek in the droughts. If you took a sponge and it's wet and full of water, and set that down, the water trickles out of it slowly if it's saturated. But if you have a sponge that's dry, or you have no sponge, that water just flows off, without a sponge. And with a dry sponge, it'll soak it up and hold it and then release it later. But wildlife, or grazing animals can be particularly damaging to that. And once they remove the vegetation, the sponge starts to go. This brings me to one of the common myths. You mentioned the cottonwood trees. There's a common myth that goes around that, those trees there, they're sucking up all the water. They're killing the river. The trees are sucking up all the water from the river. So if we want the river to continue to flow, well, we're going to cut down all these cottonwood trees. And I've heard this myth from people that I considered fairly educated. But the reality of the situation is that there's a thing called green water. And that's the water that exists within living plants. And is in that flow and in that interchange. And when you remove the plants, you removed all the green water from that situation. You also removed what we would term riparian rebar, which is the roots of the plants that hold the banks together. And people here along the Blanco River, they lost a lot of bank. And if land is worth money, and then you've got $1 million piece of riverfront, and all of a sudden the flood comes and takes away 20 feet of that, well, you can do the math on what the value of that land in a monetary sense is. And from there you can calculate, well, if we're thinking in monetary terms, what is the value of the trees and the value of the grass that was holding that bank together? What is the value of those ecological services, those ecosystem services?
And that would be,
tremendous.
In case people can't do the math, it would be priceless.
Yeah, it would be priceless, because nothing else is going to do that work. You can't line a river in concrete and expect it to have an interchange with the groundwater supply. You can't line a river with concrete and expect there to be fish in the river. And you can't line a river with concrete and enjoy paddling it. They've done some really great work here in Texas, in San Antonio, where the San Antonio River for a stretch was nothing but a drainage ditch. And it wasn't even a flowing drainage ditch. So the river would end in this and become just this concrete channel with a grass bottom. And it's shaped like a trapezoid, and it's designed to move the water away from the city as quickly as possible. And that's it. Well, at a certain point, it wasn't working very well. It was designed as a flood control measure and wasn't controlling flooding anymore, because the watershed upstream was too far developed, and the engineering and designing on that, you couldn't design for a storm that big. So they started converting it back into our native riparian prairie and native riparian forest. And they've done 9 miles of riverfront. It's a very large project and a large project area, and it's tremendous what they've done. They turned a concrete-lined ditch back into a river. And
wow. And that is no easy feat. Not an easy feat.
Oh, no, it's not at all. It's quite an investment by the city as well, but what they get back from it is a place where people can go hike and bike, and a place where people can go kayaking. There's businesses now of people leading kayak tours. There's jobs for people in taking care of those parks, and there's jobs for people in terms of doing that ecological restoration work. And they've found endangered species in that area now. They've come back. The black-capped vireo came back
That's
to that
amazing.
location. Painted buntings are back. So you took this zero space that was concrete and turf grass and had no life, and was just, a flash flood alley where water ripped through it and was gone, headed toward the Gulf of Mexico. And now it's continually flowing. It's enough water for people to kayak through. There are willow trees. There's tremendous bird life, tremendous grasses, and it's a really beautiful thing to see that happen, and especially in such a conservative place. And I think it comes down to we can all find that middle ground, and that, you know, whether you're conservative or liberal, there is a love of nature and the earth, and if we can find the common ground on that and agree, hey, let's invest in taking care of our natural spaces. It's remarkable what happens with that, and it's a beautiful project. If you're ever down in San Antonio, check out the Mission Reach. Go on a Mission Reach kayak tour and tell the good people at the San Antonio River Authority that they've done a really good job, because I'm not aware of another project like that. 9 miles of river from ditch to river. Undoing that engineering.
Yeah, the thing is, like, Texas seems to be, you know, coming out and just making some amazing decisions about its state. You know, they're bringing their gold back from the Federal Reserve. They created a gold depository where people will actually be able to have eventually, you know, accounts in Texas. It's called the Texas Bullion Depository. So they'll be able to actually have their money in solid assets. So Texas is, like, you know, really changing and really doing their job. You know, the people in Texas and the people who are getting elected are really trying to make some really big changes in Texas, and it's so good to see. I mean, it's so good to see that there's, like, this hope, and there's big, you know, active communities. And I was we have about 4 minutes, but this summer, I was lucky enough, part of my herbal medicine course that I take, I go like about a week once a month, and I go up to Grass Valley, Nevada City, California, which is pretty progressive. With Nevada City now is the first city in the United States to ban 5G. So they're really kind of...
I heard about that.
Yeah, so they're really big there. You know, there's a lot of kind of, you know, conscious people, and but I got to go on this tour, and it was of this area which the native people up there manage, and it's called a climax forest. And we got to go through it, and there was a native guy who, for his tribe, he does the cultural, they call it cultural land restoration, right? So that's what he does. And he also does storytelling, and he showed us, like, trees that, you know, they would have taken the bark from in a certain way, and the women made their clothing from it, their skirts and stuff. But we got to walk through this forest area, and one of the things that he said about it was that, you know, like, you want the trees to fall over. There was, like, this beautiful creek that ran through it that was all misty, and, you know, it was all enclosed forest because it's a climax forest, which means that it's perfect, it's sustainable, it's sustaining itself. It doesn't need any help unless a disaster comes, and then it'll need help again. And that it's out of what he called the transitional process. And he said that they use a lot of different kinds of plants for the transitional process. And one of the things that they found in climax areas is that once the land has reached a climax form, that it will, as a living giant being organism, it will get rid of the transitional plants that it doesn't like, that are not long-term sustainable on its own. But they use a lot of plants that, you know, may be aggressive to make the transition. But then once the forest, then it will make a decision about what works and what doesn't, and it will eradicate the stuff that doesn't. And he talked about how the trees that in these areas that they take care of, they want the trees to fall over and cover the water, you know, because they have nutrient in them, and they have information, and they have medicine, and it's important for these things to actually break down in the water, just like it's important for them to break down in the soil. That they've found that it's really important for rivers, and rivers not to be cleaned, you know, overly cleaned as well, in order for them to be a healthy climax part of a forest.
Right, the leaving what we call large woody debris is really essential, especially when it's things like willows. And following the action of a beaver, you know, the process of biomimicry, playing the beaver and playing the bison and playing the wolf, all of these keystone species that we remove from our climax ecosystem all of those mechanisms have to be put back into place. If you break a watch, you don't expect it to work when you take a gear out. You have to put a gear that's the same size in to make the function happen. And nature and ecology is one of the most intricate pieces of clockwork. And I'm not going to say it's a machine. Our machines are imitations of natural systems. Our machines are like nature. Our nature isn't like machines. But our ecosystems, they have pieces that function. And the first rule of tinkering with anything is that you always save all the pieces. But unfortunately, what we've been doing is throwing out the pieces. And we're like, oh, this tree is not important. Oh, cottonwoods, those are trash. Those suck up water. Throw that away. Oh, these beaver, they're flooding people's houses. Let's get rid of those. Oh, these wolves are eating our livestock. Let's get rid of those. And while we were doing all that editing and cutting out of nature and thought we knew what we were doing, thought we were doing something smart, we lost something essential. And,
I agree.
The Aldo Leopold story, Thinking Like a Mountain, he talks about about hunting wolves because they thought that would help the deer population, and watching this green fire die in a she-wolf's eyes that he had killed. And it was at that moment that he had this realization of, oh, this is the wrong thing to be doing. There's something important in the wildness of the wolf being in this space. And it's something that shapes it here. And the wolves shape the deer population and keep the deer population healthy.
Well,
and taking that long-term mountain view to see, well, over 1,000 years, what is going to be the effect of removing this or putting this back in place.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Shannon Brown. It's been Shannon Brown on Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show. Thank you so much for coming on. You're always insightful and hopeful and just doing amazing work where you kind of give me hope for the millennials.
I try.
Yeah, no, you do a good job. So anyway, thanks everybody. We'll see you next Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 3 p.m. Thanks, Shannon. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Welcome to Revolution Radio, where you, the listeners, are in charge. Here at Revolution Radio, we present 48 broadcast hours of news and information each and every day. Revolution Radio never sleeps. Revolution Radio is worldwide and borderless information. Revolution Radio is also commercial-free. Revolution Radio is supported 100% by you, the listeners. And that's why we appeal to you to donate and support this station and its expenses. You can support us in many available options like archive subscriptions, our seed pack selections, or even my woodworking store. And we also even have Revolution Radio's swag at the Revolution Radio Zazzle store, in which you can get t-shirts, coffee cups, even a baby onesie. Or you can just plain donate to the cause. We cannot continue without your support, and your support is what helps pay the bills. So please, if you wish us to continue, please stop by our station support page and drop a dime on us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank or all